Good morning. I think rather good afternoon. Clock just touched noon. So I think it's like always. It's a absolute pleasure to introduce our today's guest, which is he is very popularly known as Hari, but his full name is T.N. Hari. And I think he's probably one of the most well-known faces in the HR fraternity and one of the busiest people in the webinar ecosystem for over the last 2-3 quarters. I'm sure even in events before that, you were pretty much sought after, but particularly in the last 3-4 quarters, I think Hari's suggestions and participations have been invaluable. And we've started this new dialogue where we focus on one particular industry sector and we try and deep dive so that we understand what's going on from a business outlook perspective, and obviously what is going to be the impact on employment hiring with relation to that particular industry, because that's what most of the people that we end up targeting are interested in. So it is my absolute pleasure, that's why, to welcome Hari. Thank you so much, Hari, for joining in.
Thank you so much, Ritu, for having me.
I mean, as a matter of fact, given that you managed to take this time out for us, I think it means a lot. But without further ado, the format is very simple. I have a few questions for you, Hari, which I will ask. And then, of course, I'm going to encourage the audience today that please, if you have any questions for Hari, do type in as and when we are speaking and conversing in the Q&A section. And we will try and address as many of them towards the end. So we'll spend about 15-20 minutes in our chat, and the balance time we will take on the questions. So, Hari, the first question I had in mind for you is that I actually saw Hari, the other Hari of Bigbasket, Hari's interview, where he actually said that you lost almost 80% of your workforce within the 2 days of the lockdown being announced. But you also ended up hiring 16,000 people in just over 2 weeks. So I think, of course, after that, we witnessed a series of innovation from Bigbasket. I think we saw community selling, where you were trying to compile orders within a particular community. We've also seen you introduce BB Instance, which are these smart self-serving kiosks in the apartment. So how do you reflect? There has been a lot of challenges as well as a lot of wins the past few quarters from an overall outlook perspective.
So losing 80% of the workforce in 2 days is not news at all, because that in some ways was the intention, right, of the lockdown, that people had to stay at home. Just as, you and I wanted to stay at home at that point of time when we were all scared of, getting infected by COVID. Everyone wanted to stay at home. And in the past, also, there have been some emergencies, but the essential services, what constituted essential services at that point of time was clear. So, for example, railways, bus services, electricity, water supply, utilities, garbage clearance, they were all considered essential services. The government ensured that they were up and running. But in this pandemic, the railways themselves were not essential. Train services came to a halt, bus services came to a halt. So there was a bit of confusion in terms of what constitute essential services and what are the implications of having people locked down at home. People need to eat food and drink water. So I think it took a couple of days for the government to realize that, you can't keep the grocery stores, shut, whether they are, online grocery stores like Bigbasket or even the physical mom and pop stores. And therefore, I think there was a quick realization, and the government opened up. So small mom and pop neighborhood stores opened up. Bigbasket deliveries were, permitted by the government. So all that quickly took off. And we hired 16,000 people, I think the point you made. I don't know whether we really need to take all the credit for doing this, because I think India is a poor nation. A good number of people, the majority of the people, don't have more than a month's savings and can't afford to be out of work. They're not as lucky as people on this call. So they need to be at work. For them, there's no choice. So I think they cannot afford to be sitting at home. So they were looking for alternate employment sources. And, the physical stores were shut, restaurant businesses were down, many other businesses were actually decimated. So one potential company that continued to run and grow was Bigbasket. So it wasn't particularly difficult for us to hire. I mean, I can sit here and take all the credit and say we did such an outstanding job of hiring 16,000 people in 2 weeks, but that's not the reality. The reality is that the condition of India, the condition of Indian people, the poverty levels, they ensure that people can't stay at home for too long. So I think we hired people very quickly. I think reflecting back, we were just lucky, as a company, as individuals, as employees of Bigbasket. I think we need to thank God because so many people lost their jobs. So many industries were decimated, airlines to restaurants to physical retail stores. But we continued to see growth. We had the tailwind behind us, and we made the best of whatever opportunity was in front of us.
So I know you are choosing to be humble, but 16,000 jobs are finally 16,000 jobs. But on that note, I have one question that you're mentioning that, yes, maybe at that point of time, there were a lot of people who were rendered jobless. And hence, maybe given that you were the only ones hiring with that kind of numbers, your ability to match becomes a little, probably tad easier, but still it's a big ask. But I want to understand, did you see a pattern where people from certain catchments or certain industries were suddenly, who earlier may not have picked up a Bigbasket job, but were interested in picking up or taking up these job roles?
So the early days of lockdown saw a lot of moving parts. And one big moving part was the migrant workforce, which had come to, these major metros from different parts of India, from places like Odisha, West Bengal, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, Uttaranchal, Assam. I think they were all stuck in cities without a job and without a source of income. And many of them began migrating back, and in the absence of train and bus services, they began migrating back on foot. That was a tragic story, and it became the face of COVID and lockdown in India. The other moving part was that, there were lots of people who lost their jobs. So restaurants shut, physical stores shut. So they were all available, for whichever companies were hiring. Cab services, Ola, Uber had to shut. So those drivers were also available. Right. So I would say that, in some ways, we did try and leverage all these alternate employment pools or potential talent pools. We looked at them. But we found that, whatever expectation or initial enthusiasm we had about these categories turned out to be false, because many of them were not keen to do the kind of jobs that we had for them. For instance, delivering grocery, picking grocery at the warehouses, picking orders. That did not excite many of them because that was not their core competence or core skill. If driving is your core competence, you want to be driving people around and not be working in a warehouse picking grocery. So we realized that that did not work for us. So in some ways, we had to then go back to our traditional talent pools, talent sources. And, our HR teams worked very hard, very assiduously with all the people who had left us, contacted them, contacted their friends and other sources, and requested if they could come back. And we made some arrangements for them, both in terms of stay, both in terms of hygiene at the workplace. So gradually people began returning, and people similar to them also we began to hire. So eventually we had to rely on the talent pool that we always relied on.
Thanks, Hari. So Hari, just I think the unimaginable scaling up that happened for your particular segment. And I'm sure that now the industry is quite nicely poised for sustained growth. So how do you see the online grocery industry evolving, like transforming over the next few years? Is there something that we should be expecting which is radically different from what we are now experiencing?
So that's a very interesting question. So I think you need to understand the context a little bit before I respond to this. Let's just look at how grocery itself evolved in India. So you had the large mom and pop stores largely. And then at some point of time, 25 years back, you had the modern retail coming in, mid-sized formats, small formats, large format stores setting up in a big way. People at that point of time were so enthusiastic that they said, the mom and pop stores would die. Nothing happened. The mom and pop stores did not die even after 25 years. Modern retail just has about 5% of the overall grocery share. Online retail then came about 8 to 10 years back. Online retail is just a paltry 2% of the entire grocery space. Grocery market in India is $600 billion. Bigbasket does just $1 billion out of those. And all the online put together won't exceed 2%. So we haven't even scratched the surface. I would love to say that Bigbasket is creating waves and so are the other online companies, but online companies have hardly made an impact. I think they have touched the 40, 50 million high-end consumers in tier 1 cities in India. They are the people who are looking for assortment. They are the people who are looking for convenience and maybe to some extent price as well, but price isn't as critical as assortment and convenience. But this assortment and convenience is not going to excite people in tier 3 and tier 2 towns in India. For them, price is important. The whole of India, which is the middle India of 400 million consumers, is not going to care for assortment. They are looking for a completely different kind of a solution. So I think online companies, whether it's Bigbasket or anybody else, needs to figure out what's the value proposition for the middle India, for 400 million consumers. So the 40 million, 50 million consumers is always very easy to acquire and easy to tap into. But those 400 million consumers are far more demanding. Their price performance expectations are very different. For the same level of performance, they would expect a lower price. Or for the same price, they would expect a much higher degree of performance. So the price performance expectations of middle India is very different. And I think many of these companies, online companies, will try and enter tier 3 towns, but will struggle in a big way. Even Bigbasket's value proposition is not yet completely proven, in tier 2 or even tier 3 towns. And I think we are still trying to look at our, business model, because the business model is not easily going to scale very profitably in a tier 2 town, where price is important, convenience is not critical, assortment is not as important. So I think, this is an interesting channel that's evolving, but it's not earth-shattering. It's not game-changing. I think, with the entry of new players like JioMart, Tata's are entering this space. I think all of us are collectively going to discover what the new customer in India is, the 400 million middle India is going to look like. What are their problems? How do we figure out what product is relevant for them? They've always bought grocery. Just remember that mom and pop store were a very powerful source. They are not somebody that you can laugh at. They have survived for 100 years. It is not easy to displace them. They are solving a real problem. And if you have to enter that space and be an alternative, you have to do it much better. And that's not easy, I can tell you, in tier 3 India.
Absolutely. I think you've already probably responded to some of the questions I have. So I'm going to switch gears to asking you one question that, I remember the first version of Bigbasket had a finite set of categories that you were looking into. But I think over the years, we've seen that you've entered into different categories.
Correct.
So, while I think it's all around the delivery model around certain essential items and certain non-essential also. But can you foresee Bigbasket changing or going into something entirely different or morphing, or are there new avenues of growth that you're looking at beyond just adding categories today?
Right. So I would say, as a company, as our DNA, as our philosophy, I think Bigbasket would stick to the knitting, which is we would continue to stay with grocery and not try and do something which is radically different. So we might expand, and we have expanded into adjacent categories. For example, meats is an adjacent category we were not in, and we are now actively getting into. We are getting actively into beauty. We have a beauty category where our assortment is probably as good as a rival like Nykaa. But having said that, I think beauty is not just about assortment. Beauty is about branding. I think we are still learning how to get our branding right when it comes to beauty products. And in short, I don't think we are going to try anything dramatically different. So we will stick to things that people purchase regularly at a high frequency. It could be grocery, it could be beauty products. We are also looking at, for example, expanding our B2B business to include pharmacies. Earlier, we sold to hotels, restaurants, catering businesses, and the Kirana stores, but we've expanded that to include pharmacies because pharmacies have also become places where a lot of, healthcare products, skincare products are commonly sold.
Yeah.
So that's a segment that we are targeting as well. But we are not going to do anything dramatically different. We are focused on unit economics, running the business sustainably, getting to, build a profitable retail company and building a sustainable business at this point of time.
Thanks, Hari. This question also comes from the fact that I'm watching all these big names in the e-commerce, and pretty much most of them are trying to now add on to a muscle where your capability is, right? Like, for example, whether it's Flipkart, Amazon, everybody is now trying to look at the grocery segment very
Yes.
actively. Amazon just made I just read in the news that they are also trying to look at pharmacy as an important segment.
Yeah.
Haven't you guys as your leadership team within Bigbasket thought about doing the reverse? Which means you guys have created such a strong niche in the grocery segment. There is no,
I lost you, Ritu.
Hello?
So what is, I didn't get the last sentence.
So I'm saying, like, for example, the Amazon of the world are also now looking at adding on pharmacy, for example.
Yes, I heard that. Yeah.
So amongst your own internal leadership brainstorming, haven't you had, Hari, are you still with me? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm saying amongst your leadership team, has there ever been a talk that let's aim for being an e-commerce company and not just in retail? I mean, that's essentially my curiosity.
No, absolutely not. So for example, I think right from the beginning, companies have taken two positions. One is whether they want to be a horizontal and all-purpose store like an Amazon or a Flipkart,
right,
or be a vertical. And a vertical could be a grocery vertical where Bigbasket has taken leadership position. Or for example, it could be a company like Lenskart. It could be, Pepper Tap in furniture.
right.
You could have multiple verticals. And these verticals are going to be very strong because they understand the domain well. And the horizontals like Flipkart and Amazon are really going to struggle to fight these vertical players. So for example, beating Bigbasket at grocery will not be easy for an Amazon or a Flipkart. I am not underrating Amazon. I have deep respect for them. And I think it's one of the greatest companies ever built. But fighting Bigbasket on its execution in grocery is not going to be easy for them because they're doing multiple categories. But that's the strategy they've chosen. Do everything. It's an all-purpose store. Everything store is what Amazon is. And JioMart also is eventually aiming to be something like that, which is an everything store. The Tatas with their super app want to be an everything store. And therefore, I think many of them will end up acquiring these so-called little verticals because it's not easy to build capabilities organically in these verticals. And we as a company have chosen not to be a horizontal because a horizontal play requires a completely different DNA. It needs a different set of investors. It needs a lot of cash burn. It needs billions of dollars of cash burn before it gets sustainable. So I think we've chosen not to do that. And we will never do that.
And that's probably why you've become attractive for some of these big
Correct.
names, right?
Correct.
Like I was reading that the Tatas have set aside $1.2 billion for their foray into this e-commerce, grocers, everything, that entire segment per se. But, a lot of money and a lot of interest. And let's talk about what I think everybody's keen to understand from you, Hari, is that what does that mean in terms of future employment generation, what it means for the new kinds of roles that today's youth can be preparing themselves for, what kind of skills. I think that's essentially what people would want to know from you.
Right. So I think we need to be very realistic here. I will be very candid. So for example, in India, 12 million people enter employable age every year. Every year, that is. And in the last 10 years, almost 10 years at Bigbasket, we have created 30,000 jobs, which is 0.025% of the number of jobs that need to be created in India. It's not even a drop in the ocean. It's a very small drop. And I can take pride and brag that we are creating jobs, but we are not creating these kind of jobs. India needs 12 million jobs a year. And even if you put 10 Bigbaskets and Swiggies and all these e-commerce companies, it's not even a big drop in the ocean. So I am not very optimistic about these companies being great job creators.
Right.
The real job creators will always be the unsung heroes, unloved heroes, unwelcome heroes. They are the small, micro, and middle enterprises of India. They will be the job creators. We need to respect them. We need to lay out the red carpet for them. The government needs to provide them all kinds of support, provide them with a level playing field, because in India, the micro enterprises are going to be the job creators. Now, coming to future in terms of the skills that are required, I think it will be a good idea to understand what industries are taking shape, what industries are shutting down, to get a good sense of what skills will be needed. So for example, I think EdTech is going through a very big change. The way education is delivered is going through a big change. You may not have going forward too many universities, brick and mortar buildings where people go into classrooms and study. My daughter finished her first term with University of New South Wales, Sydney, sitting at home. And it's unlikely she will go there for the second term, although there's a likelihood of opening up. So I can see, a good number of students studying online across the world. You can sit in Bangalore and attend, a Berkeley program. And maybe you need to just be there for 2 or 3 months a year to interact with the faculty and with your fellow students, but you won't have to be there for 12 months in a year. So I think that's taking shape. There have been several unicorns that have already emerged in the edtech space. I can see some more unicorns very clearly emerging. Another industry, for example, that will take shape is anything which creates collaborative software tools. For example, Zoom is getting better every day. Google Meet is getting better every day. Microsoft Teams is getting better every day. And these tools are so effective that these online meetings are almost as good as physical in-person meetings. I've attended conferences, online conferences, and these conferences are as effective as almost real in-person conferences where 1,000 people come into a five-star hotel lobby or big meeting rooms and have these sessions. And they're far more effective because you don't have to travel. You can pick and choose your sessions so beautifully. It's all done. So I think this industry is taking shape. I also can see that supply chains which are geared towards online commerce are also going to take shape in a big way. So physical retail might probably have lost its sheen, while people will again go back to physical stores. But I think online commerce is here to stay in a very big way. Supply chains built around online commerce are taking shape and are here to stay. So online commerce, I think, will take off in a big way. So some trends are clearly there. And broadly, my view about India as a nation is that we will not be able to create more than 1 million jobs, 1 million high-paying jobs. And therefore, the remaining 11 million jobs will all be blue-collar workers. And therefore, I think India will be a nation of blue-collar workers. If you just look at India's GDP, if you look at 20-25% savings of that GDP and treat that as an investment to create jobs and divide that by what capital it takes to create one job, you won't end up with more than 1 million well-paying jobs. So India will be a blue-collar nation, all said and done. And therefore, we will have to prepare ourselves for this, brace ourselves for this, be very accepting of this. And, some skills will always be, in demand. People will always say, as companies go online, you will need people who understand digital marketing. You will need people who understand analytics, because data sciences also become very important. But in terms of the number of jobs, there will be not even a minuscule of a minuscule in terms of the number of jobs that they would create. That's my overview of India and
Thank
its
you so
jobs.
much. I mean, you did a brilliant job of the overview. And I'm actually cognizant of the time, but I would take the liberty of extending today's session by a few minutes more, if it's okay with you, Hari.
Perfectly okay with me.
So I would actually encourage all of you who are attending, if you have questions for Hari, please start writing them down in the Q&A section, because I'm going to come towards the last leg of my questions with Hari. While all of us were struggling in the storm called pandemic and was pretty hapless and clueless, Hari is one of those people who managed to write 2 books. So I think one is probably due for launch within
Next
on
Saturday.
12th, on 12th, yes.
Yeah.
And the other one also is around the corner. So I have a few questions for you. Sony, could you just make me a host? Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to just share a bit about the, so this is essentially, just give me a minute. Sorry, let me just, before I come to that, sorry. The wrong time that suddenly Google wants me to re-sign and validate myself. Sony, do you have a
No worries
that?
at all.
Do you have a link of that of the PPT? Then you can probably share it.
I will check for it, Ritu. I don't have it handy.
But anyway, so Hari, while by that,
Yeah.
I mean, we are pulling up the books which he has written, but Hari actually wrote a book called Sailing Through a Storm, which he and Sanjay Swami has co-authored. He also wrote another book, From Pony to Unicorn, which he actually wrote with Sanjeev Agarwal, who's founder of Daksh, if I'm not mistaken,
Correct.
and Hari. Hari and Sanjeev goes a long way, and they've worked together in the past. So actually, I had a few questions for you, Hari.
Yeah.
First and foremost, congratulations. While we
Thank
were
you.
wasting our time watching Netflix, you are writing books. So I have one question on your first book, Sailing Through a Storm. So I think if you could state one example from the book where adversity induced by a crisis has actually led to an innovation or change in the future. I haven't read the book, but I'm just curious to know if there is any such reference.
Yes, I will give you two examples. One is from recent history and one is from not so recent history. I think both examples are easy to understand. So 1453 was the year when Ottoman Turks took Constantinople and defeated the Byzantines. That was pretty much the end of the Byzantine Empire and the end of the Roman era completely. So what happened after that was the Turks began expanding into Europe and parts of Asia, and they cut off all the land routes, trade routes between Europe and Asia, as a result of which no trade was possible. So that was a big adversity for all the businesses that relied on trade between these two geographies. But then that was used as an opportunity by some individuals and some rulers to discover sea routes to Asia. And that triggered a massive search for sea routes to Asia. In the process, Columbus ended up sailing westwards and discovered Americas. Magellan, went around the globe. Vasco da Gama, came to India. It isn't as easy as it appears, because on the map, it looks like Vasco da Gama had to just traverse the coast of Africa, take a bend at the Cape of Good Hope and get to India. But actually, the winds took him to almost South America because they could not rely on anything else other than wind power. So when the seasons changed, the ships came back and discovered India. So this was a very interesting situation. And there's so many other examples. World War II, for example, right? It was a war, but almost all innovations in science, in physics, in engineering happened during World War II. Not even beyond this, even in medicine. Sulfur drugs were discovered in World War II. Sulfur drugs which actually helped eradicate a lot of disease. And even if you just look back at a recent crisis that's happened in the last century, many of you must have heard of this company called Johnson & Johnson. There was a criminal who took capsules of Tylenol from a bottle in a few stores in Chicago and then laced them with cyanide and replaced them back in the stores. And it resulted in 5 or 6 deaths. And people suddenly stopped using Tylenol capsules. It was a best-selling product. Analysts predicted the death of Johnson & Johnson at that point of time. But the way they dealt with this crisis created renewed trust in the people. They took away all the capsules, Tylenol capsules from the shelves, completely withdrew all the products and completely changed the packaging. And the way they responded with honesty, transparency, and completely acknowledged what had happened and took all the corrective steps, the public actually loved them for that. And their stock price actually went up beyond what it was pre-Tylenol crisis. So there are hundreds of examples, where a crisis can always be used, to innovate And I can give you examples from a nearer example, Bigbasket, for example, right? For us, we could have said, you know what, we don't have people coming. We don't have enough, supply chains have broken. But then what we did was we innovated. We said, we have fewer people. How can we innovate and get more from less? We reduced the assortment. We co-located all the reduced assortment so that the pickers didn't have to walk a lot. We supplied to communities. We did a lot of small innovations, which actually helped us rise to the occasion. So I would say that, a crisis, you can either crumble and complain, say that, what, I am done for, or you can say what, look, let's see this as an opportunity and figure out what is it that we could do better.
Great, thank you so much. And like I have shared with you that my pre-order is in place. So I'm looking forward to receiving it at the earliest from Amazon. Now, the other one is also equally interesting because I'm sure you have seen through this journey, and maybe you have seen through this journey twice, because those days we probably would not call unicorns the way we use the term, but you've been part
Correct.
of another organizations which started very small and grew into something amazingly big. So from your experience, what are the fundamental ingredients of scaling up a startup to a unicorn?
So in the book, we've identified 9 ingredients, and each of them in itself is worthy of a chapter in the book. And very quickly, those 9 ingredients are: market itself. The market needs to be big, the total addressable market. You need to be part of a mega trend. Those are the 2 M's. I can't go into the details in this call, but for example, those are the 2 M's. Then you have, strategic, you need to make some right strategic choices. The strategic choice, for example, that Bigbasket made was to go with an inventory-led model versus a marketplace model. So you need to get a few strategic choices right. Strategic execution is the next element. Customer centricity is the next one. Culture, organization culture is the next one. Founder ambition is very important. Foundation, building the foundation is very important. And finally, getting the human capital, issues and initiatives right is critical. So MM, FF, CC, SS, and H, those are the 9 elements, I would say, are the key ingredients for getting scaling right. And each of them we've discussed at length with relevant examples.
Thank you so much. And I know I don't want to be greedy by asking you more questions about the book. However, I think it's important now to take on some of the questions that are coming in from our participants. I do have another question from my side, but I'm going to leave it for later if we have some time. So I think there is one question that Arun asked from Arun Kumar. So in your view, with the new spikes in COVID, what return to work policy and procedures are likely to be implemented?
So this is, I would, try and predict something here, but I don't know how things will unfold because this is a unique crisis. So for example, at Bigbasket, we've taken a decision not to get people to work in the corporate office until the end of March. And this is a decision that many companies have taken. So this is not unique. And most companies, including Bigbasket, have also taken the decision that going forward, we are unlikely to have more than 20 to 30% of the workforce in office, which means that it could be by rotation, but at no point of time will the office have more than 20 to 30% of the people working in that office. And I'm not talking of, the regions where, businesses are, being delivered to customers. So for example, warehouses, you can't have anything excepting the people will have to come to work. Deliveries, people will have to come to work. I'm talking more of corporate offices and companies which are largely doing office work. For example, a Google, a Facebook, Accenture. So these are companies, in my view, will adapt to a very lean workforce in the office, less than 10 to 20% at any point of time. And I think the world has accepted once and for all that remote working is very much possible. Until now, only offshore companies which had teams distributed between US, Europe, and India, on the other hand, understood virtual working. But I think the world has now understood the power of virtual working, the advantages it provides to people. I think it needed the pandemic to teach the world, but the world has learned it. So I think that's the way it will be.
I'm sure that's probably where we are headed towards. But sometimes I worry about the impact it can potentially have on employment. But I think that's a broader question. I'll come to that
Yeah,
later.
yeah,
Maybe. One
correct.
more question Nidhi
I think this
has.
will drive the gig employment model more than before.
Absolutely. The Nidhi has an interesting question. She asked, how does Bigbasket aim to touch the lives of people living in the tier 3 and tier 4 cities, especially where digital media is not all pervasive? How do you intend to go hyper local where the addresses of your customer may be tough to locate and find? What in these small towns will lure the consumers to go online and shop? The reason I ask this is that it clearly means the culture belief system change
Yeah.
on how the consumer operates today versus how you would like to see them in future.
Yeah. So I think, in the last 10 to 15 years, something has been quietly taking shape in India. Many of us may not have recognized it. And that is all the rails needed to do digital businesses in a digital way have been laid beautifully. Aadhaar is in place. More than 1.2 billion Indians have an identity. The payment systems are all in place. Now in India, you can move money faster and cheaper than anywhere else in the world. So all the rails have been built. Now businesses need to be created that can ride on these rails. So I think once the ecosystem of rails is all there, companies now need to think of what products are really relevant for the 400 million middle India. I think companies need to be innovative in coming up with products at relevant price points, because products that were relevant for 40 million, 50 million rich Indians in tier 1 cities are going to be completely irrelevant for 400 million Indians. So I think a new breed of entrepreneurs are actually taking shape. Those new breed of entrepreneurs have been born and brought up in middle India, in provincial towns in India, in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Maharashtra, smaller towns, have studied engineering and business in tier 1 cities, understand the power of technology, are going back and building these businesses because they understand the pulse of those consumers much better than those entrepreneurs who grew up in tier 1 India. And we can see some of these businesses taking shape. The reality is going to be that it is always difficult to build businesses which are profitable and are serving middle India. It's always easy to build businesses that are profitable and serving rich consumers, because rich consumers are willing to pay a heavy premium for a feature. Whereas, those who are middle and lower end of the pyramid will not be willing to pay that. So how do you deliver great value? How do you deliver that price value proposition? How do you create that? I think that is going to be the challenge for the next generation of entrepreneurs who want to go into middle India.
Wow. I wish I could just increase the time a little more, but I will have, there are a couple of more questions which I think you should probably take on, Hari. One is, of
Okay.
course, is that I think everybody is, because the work dynamic has changed, workplace has changed. For example, Vikas asked that, what do you do? How does engagement and retention transform? And how do you look at it differently from what it has been in the past? I know I'm sure everybody in HR is being asked this question these days. Not just
Yes,
HR,
yes.
even business CEOs are struggling with this question.
So just think about it, right? Some change is forced on you. Either you accept it and figure out how to deal with it, or you can keep on complaining about it. Like, what? This is not allowing me to do things in the way I used to do it. And therefore, I won't be effective. You need to find ways in which you can still be effective. And this is not the first time people are working remote. You have companies like Infosys, you have Accenture, IBM, where part of the team is in Costa Rica, part of the team is in New York, part of the team is in Krakow in Poland, part of the team is in Bangalore. And these teams have been working pretty well. How are they staying engaged? How are their managers engaging them? And there are certain principles, and the playbook has already been written. The playbook is working very well in these companies. There are certain principles which need to be applied. All that companies like Bigbasket and other companies, which are purely domestic companies that are used to co-located teams, need to figure out that playbook and learn from that playbook. It isn't very difficult. You certainly will never have face-to-face effectiveness in some ways, but you also have so many other positives in this kind of a remote working situation, virtual working environments. I think we all need to adapt.
Absolutely. Um, I know we are really short of time, and I know a lot of more questions are coming in, but I have to ask Hari this one question before I let him go. Hari, there's a much talk on the 4 labor codes, and you are somebody that we all look up to. So, how do you think that impacts businesses and industries? Do you see that do you see that it has an impact, or you think it is still wanting, or is it things that you would expect more coming out of the Ministry of Labor? Your thoughts on that, Hari?
So I think, India is a very interesting country because in some ways it's a poor country where people who are marginalized need to be protected by the government with the right kind of regulation. But over-regulation, over-protection will also mean that small businesses, forget the big companies, small businesses, the micro-entrepreneurs, micro-enterprises are going to have challenges in dealing with this regulation. So I think regulation has always got to do the right balance, which is protecting the downtrodden, protecting the marginalized on the one hand, and also allowing businesses to operate freely. I'm talking of the small micro entrepreneurs to operate freely without hassle, without harassment. And the reality in India has been that while the laws have been laid out with a lot of good intent, when it came to the ground, there has been a lot of adversarial relationship between those who are enforcing the law and those who are doing business. I think unless this relationship on the ground changes, the laws are not going to change anything on the ground. So in principle, if you just see what has the laws, 4 codes have tried to do, they've tried to accomplish a couple of things. One is they've tried to simplify. Earlier, you had 44 labor codes. The definition of wage was different in each of those codes. They simplified and said, this is the definition of a wage, for instance. So they simplified it. The second thing is that in India, 90% of the workforce is still unorganized. Only less than 10% maybe is organized. How do you get these 90% under the organized category? The question here is, do you really want to get everybody into the organized category? Is it helpful for the workers? Is it helpful for the micro entrepreneurs? Itself is a big question, because just because you organize everybody does not mean that it's going to be hunky-dory for the country as a whole. So I think India is a complex country. Solutions are always going to be attempted. No solution is going to be perfect. No single labor law, 4 labor laws are going to change this country's destiny. All of us need to be committed to doing the right thing for all our stakeholders. If we are running a business, we should be committed to doing the right thing for the underprivileged, for the marginalized people who work for us, irrespective of whether there's a law or not a law. We have to be committed to doing the right things. And that's the way forward, I think.
Thank you so much. I know that I can end up being greedy, but I know that I've taken you all out of your work schedule, and hence discussions with Hari will continue. Let me assure you that. So I will definitely call Hari back for another session in a few months' time. But thank you so much, Hari. This was like brilliant. This was extremely useful, and we enjoyed it because this gave us insights into the industry you represent, as well as how the outlook is looking like overall. So there are still some questions which are unanswered, but do write in to us one-on-one. We'll try and address them as much as possible. Hari is very approachable as a person, so I'm sure you can reach out to Hari directly. I think he's available on social media very, very widely. So please do reach out to him if you have any questions. And Hari, all the best for your 2 books.
And thank you so much, Ritu. I've been a great fan of yours and admire the kind of work that you're doing, trying to change the face of India, trying to get India back to work. Very noble intention and great execution. All the best to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Hari. We do need all the encouragement on this front. Thank you again. Thanks, Hari. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye. Take care.
Bye.